Hello there and welcome to the API Crush series. In this video, we're going to reuse the application which we built in the previous section. As you can see, this is the application which we built in the previous section. And we're going to retain all the UI elements. So this is a great way to use this as a template. So building the UI takes time. And by doing this, you can also maintain consistency across your different applications. Great. And also what we're going to do in this video is set up the API on the SAP Build Apps, because keep in mind that we have built the XANO backend, and at the same time we have to come and configure that API to be able to use in the SAP Build Apps. And this has to be done at the app level for every single app, not at a central global level. All right, let's get started. So this is the app which we built in the previous section. So please do take a look at it if you haven't. And let me go back to the lobby. So this is where all your applications are present. And this is the name of my application. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the ellipsis or the three dots. And I'm going to say save as new project. So this gives me the ability to copy that and reuse it. All right. So let's go and change it. I'm going to say, let's go and give it a different name. I'm going to call it API methods. API CRUD methods. Okay, you can call it anything you like. Go ahead and save it. And there you go. You have yourself a copy of your previous application. Perfect. Now what we need to do is we need to be able to set up the API inside this application. So to do that, let's go to data, and you will see that your custom entity is available because this is a copy of the previous applications. So that can stay as it is if you want it to, that's fine. But to be able to set up the API, let's come to the SAP Build Apps Classic data entities. Let's click on the plus sign, and you have a bunch of options here, and we're going to choose the first option, which is the REST API method. Go ahead and click on it, and here you need to give the different details. So the first is the base URL, and of course the name itself. So let's go and give it a name. Let's call it XANO. This is the name of the API you're going to use. And now we need the base URL. So go to XANO back. All right, great. So we're back in XANO, and I'm going to go to APIs. Actually, I am in APIs. So let's go and open the API group. So you can see the API here. Now keep in mind that this is the group base URL. All the tables inside this group can be accessed through this API. All right, so let's copy this and let's go back to SAP Build Apps here, and let's quickly paste it. As you can see, it does not point to any table. That's fine as long as you know how to handle it in the other methods. A better way is to actually give it the table name right here, which is customer underscore new. Then let's go and save the data entity. There you go. You have a integration available. Now we'll have to set up all the methods, and we're also going to test it. So let's open it. Now the first thing is the easy piece, which is to get all the records. So let's go to get collection. And as you can see, I can see the table. That's very, very important. If you don't see this, that means your base URL is not having the table name. So you have to give the table name. And what is your table name? And the table name is right about here. So I have multiple tables. So depending on what I use, then I'll be able to access that specific data. All right, there you go. Okay, perfect. Now I am in the get collection, and I don't need to pass anything because I'm going to get everything from the XANO backend. So you have a configuration tab, and there are various things here we will discuss as needed. And then you have a test tab. This is where you can run the test, pass the parameters and things like that. Next is schema. This is very important because it gets the schema from the XANO backend. And this is where you can enable or disable this method. Now let's go to test and run the tests. Now, as I said before, the get collection does not take a variable as an input because it's getting all the records available in the API backend. So let's go and run the test. And there you go. It has two records, and you can see ID 2 and ID 3 because ID 1 was deleted when we were testing the API. Great, this is really good stuff. What it means that we have configured the base UI correctly, and we have not programmed any authentication on the XANO backend because we did not give the access token in our request, and we're able to get the data back, and that's great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get the schema, basically the structure of the table, from the XANO database or the XANO backend. What it means is, let me take you to XANO. What it means is, when we go to the database and we go to customer new, when we say the structure of the table, we're referring to the columns: ID, created at, name, and email. Now keep in mind that when you're using a production API, there'll be sometimes 10 columns, sometimes hundreds, sometimes more than that. So it's not practical to recreate that schema on the receiving end. So by using the set schema from response, we can actually go ahead and set that for ourselves. So there you go. Once you click on it, it borrows the table structure from the source and it stores it in this API definition. So we can use this definition going forward in the different methods we're going to use for the different purposes of creating, receiving, updating, and deleting. Okay, so much for it. So the first test is successful. The next is the post method or the create record method. So this is very important. You're going to be creating the record with this, right? And here you don't need to append it with anything because it doesn't take a parameter. Basically, we're not passing a filter along with this. But of course, we are passing the information based on which the record will be created. Now, because we already set the schema from response, this already knows the schema. There you go. So I can also test it from right here. So you can go ahead and give it a name if you like. So we can call it John, and let's say john@email.com. And you can test it from right here. So if I run the test and everything goes good, so there you go, it's created. This is the ID number 11 and this is the information. Great. Next is you want to update the record. So let's go to update the record. Let's go to update the record right about here. And the first thing is you need to enable it. There you go. And please do notice that the verb used here is put. And that is why we went ahead and changed the verb from patch to put. As you can see, the edit customer verb is put. That's very important. Okay, so all of that is taken care of. Now what we need to do is we need to update the record, right? So we are in the update record put option, and in the configuration, you see that it's requesting an ID because it needs to know which ID to update. So the update is based on the ID. And then, of course, you can change the values of the different columns associated with that ID. So let's go ahead and create that parameter called ID. You also need a URL placeholder with the same information, which is ID. So this is the key value here, and you can make this static or you can make it dynamic. So let's make it dynamic, and you can also give a default value. So right now it's okay. Now let's go to test, and you can see that it's showing you an ID value. That's because we created the URL placeholder. Now let's go to the XANO database real quick. Let's go to customer new, and you can see that in my first record, which is record 2, I don't have a name and email. I did some testing before this, so right now we don't have a name and email. So let's go ahead and give it a name and email. So I want to go back to my test here. So the ID is going to be 2. So this can come from a static value, this can come from a variable, this can come from a user selection, a parameter, so depending upon your design. And now let's go to the custom object. So these are all the columns available in your schema. Okay, great. So first is the name. Let's go and give it a static name. So I'm going to call it customer and then email is going to be static as well, of course, c@email.com. And ID you don't have to give here because it already knows the ID. And created at is going to be a timestamp, right? So for that we can use a formula in this case. So let's go to formula and let's go to create a formula. And I'm going to use a very simple function called timestamp. So just simply type time and you will see all the functions available for you. And the first one is a timestamp. There you go. So this is the format of the timestamp. Of course, you can format it as well. Let's go and save it. And now let's run the test. So what we're expecting is when we run the test, the row number 2 or the row with the ID 2 should update the value to customer and c@email.com. All right, let's go and test it. And there you go. So it was successful and it is updated. So let's go to the database and check. Let me refresh this real quick. And there you go. Perfect. Very good. And then finally, we need to delete. So let's go to the delete method. Let's enable it. Go to config. As you can see, this also requires an ID in the URL. So let's go ahead and punch in ID. And that's going to be the ID as well. The keys ID. And let's make it dynamic. And it also carries a default value. Right now, we don't need to set. So delete simply happens based on the ID, that is the ID of the tuple. So let's go ahead and say 2, and if I do say that, we're expecting that this first record to be deleted. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and say run test. Okay, so status is okay. That means we should no longer have this 2 records. So I'm going to go and refresh. There you go. We don't have the first record with the ID 2. That's great. So in this video, we have gone through and tested all the CRUD operations. The API is ready to be used. The schema is set, and this is really great stuff. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to set up all the variables and be ready. And then in the subsequent videos, we'll take one operation at a time and set them up. And then finally, we'll test them. I'll see you in the next video.